How could a man stay calm while his own son-in-law sold the family lake house behind his back, pocketed the profit, and hid the truth from everyone at the table? What made his smug smile vanish the instant an angry contractor marched in, demanding answers? This is the story of how I let the reckoning unfold in my own living room, and why I never lifted a finger to save him. The doorbell chimed at exactly 6:30, and I already knew who it was before I opened it. Trevor Dalton never arrived on time unless he wanted to make an entrance, and tonight was no different. My son-in-law swept through the doorway like he owned the place, his expensive cologne announcing his presence before his booming voice could. "Frank, Janice, hope you're ready for some good news tonight," Trevor called out, not bothering to remove his designer loafers before stepping onto our hardwood floors. Behind him, my daughter Melissa followed with 7-year-old Lila in tow, both looking slightly embarrassed by Trevor's grand entrance. "Trevor, honey, maybe take your shoes off," Melissa suggested quietly, but he was already halfway to our dining room, straightening his silk tie and checking his reflection in the hallway mirror. "Don't worry about it, babe. Frank doesn't mind a little wear on these old floors, do you, Frank?" Trevor shot me a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Besides, we're celebrating tonight." I bit back my first response and simply nodded toward the dining room. "Dinner's ready whenever you are." Our neighbor and family friend, Evelyn Carter, had already arrived and was helping Janice set out the serving dishes. She gave me a knowing look as Trevor launched into his pre-dinner performance, regaling everyone with stories from his real estate office while completely ignoring Lila's attempts to show him a drawing she'd made at school. "You know, Frank," Trevor said, settling into his chair without waiting for anyone else to sit, "guys like you from the older generation just don't understand how the real estate market works these days. It's all about timing, leverage, knowing when to strike." He gestured expansively with his wine glass. "Take that lake house situation, for example. You would have held on to that place forever, watching it drain money for maintenance and taxes." The lake house. My chest tightened slightly, but I kept my expression neutral. The family property had been in our lives for over 15 years, weekends teaching Melissa to water ski, later watching Trevor propose to her on that same dock, and most recently, countless afternoons with Lila learning to fish from the old wooden pier I'd built myself. "Grandpa, are we going back to the lake house soon?" Lila piped up, her innocent question cutting through Trevor's monologue. "I want to show you how I can cast the fishing line now." Trevor laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. "Oh, sweetheart, Grandpa's lake house is gone now. Daddy sold it to some nice people who'll actually use it properly." He ruffled her hair condescendingly. "Don't worry, we'll find you a better place to fish." The casual way he erased my connection to the property, reducing 15 years of memories to Grandpa's lake house that needed to be disposed of, hit harder than I expected. But I simply cut my roast beef and listened as he continued. "The thing is, Frank, you old-timers get too sentimental about property. You see a place where you taught your granddaughter to fish. I see an asset that's been underperforming for years." Trevor leaned back in his chair, warming to his subject. "When I handled the sale, and I mean really handled it, took care of every detail, I got us a price that was 30% above market value. 30%. That's the difference between someone who knows the business and someone who just fixes leaky faucets." Melissa shifted uncomfortably. "Trevor, maybe we could talk about something else." No, this is important," Trevor interrupted, his voice growing louder. "Your dad needs to understand that his way of doing things, all that hands-on maintenance, worrying about every little repair, that's old-school thinking. When you've got someone like me handling the big picture, you don't need to sweat the small stuff anymore." I felt my phone buzz against my leg and glanced down discreetly. Warren Kramer's name appeared on the missed call notification. Warren, the local contractor who'd done extensive work on the lake house over the years. I placed the phone face down on the table and returned my attention to Trevor's performance. "The best part," Trevor continued, gesturing with his fork, "is how clean the whole transaction was. No complications, no delays, no buyers getting cold feet over minor issues. Sometimes you just have to know how to present a property in the right light, if you know what I mean." He winked at Evelyn. "That's the art of the deal right there." Something cold settled in my stomach, but I kept eating. Trevor's emphasis on no complications and presenting in the right light suggested there was more to this story than his triumphant version. But as I looked around the table, Melissa trying to change the subject, Janice shooting me concerned glances, Lila playing with her food while looking confused, I realized that pushing for details now would only create a scene. "Well," I said finally, setting down my fork, "I'm sure you handled everything properly." Trevor's grin widened. "Exactly. That's what I'm talking about. Trust the professional, let the expert handle the expert stuff. He raised his wine glass. Here's to knowing when to step back and let someone else take the wheel. As we toasted, though I barely touched my glass to my lips, I noticed Trevor's phone lighting up with notifications that he kept dismissing. Each time it buzzed, his jaw tightened slightly before he forced his smile back into place. The dinner conversation moved on to other topics, but Trevor kept circling back to his real estate triumph, each retelling growing more elaborate. By the time Janice served dessert, he'd transformed the sale into a masterclass in negotiation, himself as the hero who'd saved the family from a financial burden. The previous owners, meaning you, Frank, just didn't have the vision to see what that property could become, Trevor explained to Evelyn, as if I weren't sitting right there. Sometimes it takes fresh eyes to recognize opportunity. I excused myself to help Janice clear the dishes, grateful for a moment away from Trevor's performance. In the kitchen, she squeezed my arm gently. "You're being very patient," she said quietly. "Just listening," I replied, though we both knew there was more to it than that. When I returned to the dining room, Trevor was showing Evelyn photos on his phone, pictures from the closing, him shaking hands with the buyers, standing in front of the lake house with a sold sign. In every image, his smile was triumphant, proprietary, like he'd built the place himself instead of simply signing papers to get rid of it. And the buyers were so grateful, he was saying. They kept thanking me for being so straightforward about everything. No surprises, no hidden issues, just an honest transaction between honest people. My phone buzzed again. Another missed call from Warren Kramer. The pattern had started small, almost imperceptibly, about 2 years earlier. Trevor would arrive at family gatherings with increasingly elaborate stories about his real estate successes, each one designed to highlight his expertise while subtly undermining anyone else's knowledge or experience. At first, it seemed like typical son-in-law posturing, a younger man trying to establish his place in the family hierarchy. But as the months passed, Trevor's need to dominate every conversation about money, property, or business decisions grew more aggressive. When Melissa mentioned that the lake house needed a new roof, Trevor immediately dismissed the idea of repair in favor of exploring our options. When I suggested updating the electrical system to make the place safer for Lila's visits, Trevor laughed it off as throwing good money after bad. The lake house had never been just a property to me. I'd bought it when Melissa was in high school, a modest cabin on 3 acres of wooded shoreline that needed extensive work. Over the years, I'd rebuilt the dock, renovated the kitchen, added a screened porch where we could eat dinner while watching the sunset over the water. Every improvement was done with my own hands, every repair a labor of love. Melissa had spent her college summers there, bringing friends for weekend getaways. It's where she'd learned to drive a boat, where she'd had her first serious conversations about boys and careers and what she wanted from life. When she brought Trevor there for the first time, I'd watched him survey the property with calculating eyes, already seeing dollar signs instead of memories. "It's got potential," he'd said that first weekend, standing on the deck I'd built from reclaimed lumber. "Prime waterfront footage, good bones. You could probably triple your investment with the right improvements." I'd tried to explain that it wasn't about investment returns, that some things had value beyond their market price. But Trevor had that peculiar deafness that afflicts people who measure everything in profit margins. He heard sentimental attachment and translated it as poor financial planning. The real shift came last spring, when Trevor started referring to the lake house as our property in conversations with Melissa. Not your dad's place, or even the family cabin, but our property, as if marriage had automatically transferred ownership to him. When I gently corrected him, pointing out that the deed was still in my name, he'd laughed it off. "Details, Frank. We're all family here." But details matter, especially when they involve legal ownership of real estate worth several $100,000. The first time Trevor suggested selling, I thought he was joking. We were sitting on the dock after a family barbecue, watching Lila feed breadcrumbs to the ducks, when he casually mentioned that waterfront properties in our area were absolutely hot right now. "I mean, just hypothetically," he'd said, his tone carefully casual. "If you were ever thinking about liquidating this asset, now would be the time. Market's never been better for sellers." "I'm not thinking about selling," I'd replied firmly. Of course not. I'm just saying." From a purely financial perspective, you're sitting on a gold mine here. And with Lila getting older, how much are we really going to use this place? That "we" again, as if his opinion carried equal weight with mine in decisions about my own property. Over the following months, Trevor's hypothetical suggestions became more frequent and more pointed. He'd send Melissa real estate listings showing similar properties that had sold for incredible prices. He'd mention tax advantages of selling recreational property. He'd calculate the cost of ongoing maintenance and present it as an unsustainable burden. "Your dad's getting older," I overheard him telling Melissa one evening in their kitchen, when I'd stopped by to drop off some tools I'd borrowed. "Does he really want to be climbing around on roofs and fixing dock pilings at his age? Wouldn't it be better for everyone if we converted that equity into something more manageable?" "I don't know, Trevor," Melissa had replied, her voice uncertain. "That place means a lot to him, and to me, honestly. Some of my best memories are there." Memories don't pay for roof repairs, babe, and they don't help us save for Lila's college fund. That was Trevor's genius. He always framed his wants as practical necessities, his greed as responsible planning. He made keeping the lake house sound selfish, irresponsible, even harmful to the family's financial future. The pressure campaign intensified over the winter. Trevor would arrive at family dinners with printouts of maintenance cost projections, insurance rate increases, property tax assessments. He'd shake his head sympathetically while explaining how much money the lake house was costing us every year. "I'm not saying we have to sell," he'd say, spreading his papers across our dining room table like a prosecutor presenting evidence. "I'm just saying we should look at the numbers objectively, make an informed decision based on facts, not emotions." But his facts were selective, his projections inflated. When I pointed out that the property had appreciated significantly since I'd bought it, he dismissed that as unrealized gains. When I mentioned the rental income potential, he cited hypothetical vacancy rates and maintenance disasters. Every positive aspect of ownership was theoretical. Every cost was presented as inevitable and catastrophic. The breaking point came in March, during what I thought was a casual family dinner. Trevor arrived with his laptop and a prepared presentation about optimizing our real estate portfolio. For 20 minutes, he walked us through charts and graphs showing why selling the lake house was not just advisable, but urgent. "The market window won't stay open forever," he concluded, closing his laptop with dramatic finality. "We need to move fast if we want to maximize our return." "Our return?" I'd asked quietly. "Well, the family's return. Melissa's inheritance. Lila's future." Trevor's smile was practiced, reasonable. "I'm thinking about what's best for everyone here, Frank." But he wasn't thinking about everyone. He was thinking about himself, about the commission he'd earn from the sale, about the control he'd gain over a significant family asset. And when I said I needed time to consider his proposal, his mask slipped just enough for me to see the frustration underneath. "Time is money in this business, Frank. Every day we wait is money off the table." That night, after everyone had gone home, I'd sat in my home office reviewing the original purchase documents, the insurance policies, the maintenance records I'd kept meticulously over the years. Everything was in order, everything was properly documented. The lake house was mine, legally and unambiguously. But Trevor wasn't interested in legal technicalities. He was interested in results. Over the next few weeks, he escalated his campaign through Melissa. Suddenly, every conversation with my daughter included subtle pressure about the lake house. She'd mention how much Trevor was worried about the financial burden on me. She'd suggest that maybe it was time to simplify things as I got older. She'd wonder aloud whether keeping the property was fair to Lila's future. Trevor had weaponized my own daughter's concern for my well-being, turning her love for me into leverage against me. The final manipulation came in April, when Trevor announced that he'd already spoken to several potential buyers, just to get a sense of the market. He'd had the property appraised, without my permission or knowledge, and had identified serious interest from a cash buyer. "I'm not pressuring you, Frank," he'd said, his tone maddeningly reasonable. "I'm just presenting options. The buyer is motivated, the price is right, and honestly, the timing couldn't be better for everyone involved." When I asked who had given him permission to market my property, he'd looked genuinely surprised. "I wasn't marketing anything. I was just doing some preliminary research. Due diligence. I thought you'd appreciate having professional guidance on something this important." But guidance had become direction, and direction had become control. Somehow, without my explicit consent, Trevor had positioned himself as the decision-maker regarding my own property. And when I tried to slow things down, to reassert my authority over the process, he'd made it clear that resistance would come at a cost. "Look, Frank, I understand this is emotional for you, but Melissa and Lila are counting on me to make smart financial decisions for our family. If you're not ready to move forward, that's your choice. But I can't let sentiment get in the way of what's best for my wife and daughter." The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. If I didn't cooperate with his plans, I'd be painted as the stubborn old man standing in the way of my family's financial security. Trevor would make sure Melissa saw any resistance as selfishness, any delay as irresponsibility. So when he presented the final purchase offer in May, complete with expedited closing timeline and a cash buyer ready to move immediately, I'd felt trapped between my own principles and my daughter's future happiness. "Just think about it, Frank," Trevor had said, sliding the contract across my kitchen table. "Think about what this money could mean for Lila's education, for Melissa's security. Think about the freedom it would give you. No more worrying about maintenance, no more property taxes, no more insurance headaches." But as I'd read through the purchase agreement, I'd noticed something troubling. The contract included several disclosure requirements about the property's condition, recent repairs, and known issues. Sections that Trevor would be responsible for completing accurately and honestly. Sections that I knew contained information he'd rather not share. The neighborhood barbecue at the Hendersons' house 2 weeks after the lake house closing was supposed to be a celebration of summer, but Trevor turned it into his personal victory lap. I'd barely finished loading my plate with burgers and potato salad when I heard his voice carrying across the backyard, regaling a group of neighbors with his real estate triumph. "The thing about that old lake property," Trevor was saying, gesturing expansively with his beer bottle, "is that it had been sitting there underutilized for years. Frank's a great guy, don't get me wrong, but he just didn't have the vision to see what it could become in the right hands." I found myself standing near the edge of the group, invisible as Trevor held court. Our neighbors, people who'd known me for over a decade, listened politely as my son-in-law rewrote the history of my own property. "The buyers were incredibly grateful for how transparent I was about everything," Trevor continued, his voice growing more confident as he warmed to his subject. "No hidden surprises, no last-minute revelations, just an honest, straightforward transaction that left everyone happy." Mrs. Henderson, our next-door neighbor for 15 years, glanced over at me with a questioning look. She remembered all the weekends I'd spent working on that lake house, all the times I'd shown her photos of Melissa and Lila enjoying the place, but Trevor's narrative had no room for those memories. "The best part," Trevor went on, "is that I was able to negotiate a price that was significantly above market value. When you know how to present a property properly, when you understand buyer psychology, you can create value that other people miss." Evelyn Carter appeared at my elbow, her expression carefully neutral. "Frank, how are you feeling about all this?" she asked quietly. "Just listening," I replied, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. Trevor had moved on to explaining his negotiation strategy, how he'd positioned the property to highlight its strengths while minimizing any potential concerns. That phrase, minimizing potential concerns, stuck in my mind like a splinter. "Trevor seems very confident about how everything went," Evelyn observed. He does," I agreed, watching as my son-in-law basked in the admiration of neighbors who didn't know the full story. Across the yard, Melissa was helping Lila navigate the dessert table, both of them looking uncomfortable with Trevor's public performance. When Lila spotted me, she broke away and ran over. "Grandpa, why is Daddy talking about your house to all those people?" she asked, her 7-year-old directness cutting through the adult pretense. "He's just sharing the news, sweetheart." "But you look sad," she said, studying my face with the brutal honesty of childhood. "Are you sad about the house?" Before I could answer, Trevor appeared beside us, his arm sliding around my shoulders in a gesture that looked friendly but felt possessive. "Frank's not sad, honey," Trevor said, his voice loud enough for the nearby neighbors to hear. "Grandpa's just adjusting to not having to worry about all that maintenance anymore. It's a big relief, isn't it, Frank?" The presumption in his voice, the way he answered for me like I was incapable of speaking for myself, sparked something cold and angry in my chest. But with Lila watching and half the neighborhood within earshot, I simply nodded. "That's right," I said evenly. "No more worries." Trevor's grin widened, mistaking my restraint for agreement. "See? Sometimes it takes a while to appreciate the benefits of letting a professional handle things." After the barbecue, I drove home in silence, Trevor's words echoing in my mind. The casual arrogance, the way he'd claimed credit for decisions he'd pressured me into, the complete erasure of my own role in the property I'd owned and maintained for 15 years. But it was his emphasis on transparency and no hidden surprises that bothered me most. Because I knew there were surprises, significant ones, that Trevor had carefully avoided mentioning to anyone. That evening, I sat in my home office and opened the filing cabinet where I kept all the lake house documentation. Insurance policies, maintenance records, contractor invoices, inspection reports, 15 years of meticulous record-keeping that told the real story of the property's condition. Near the bottom of the stack, I found what I was looking for, the folder containing Warren Kramer's work orders and invoices from the past 2 years. Warren had done extensive repairs on the lake house, foundation work, electrical updates, plumbing renovations, all necessary improvements that I'd commissioned to keep the property safe and functional. but as I reviewed the paperwork, I realized something troubling. Several of Warren's invoices remained unpaid, not because I hadn't intended to pay them, but because Trevor had assured me he would handle all the closing details, including outstanding contractor bills. I found my phone and scrolled through recent missed calls. 3 from Warren Kramer in the past week, all unanswered because I'd assumed they were routine follow-up calls about completed work. The next morning, I drove to the small cafe downtown where Warren often grabbed coffee before starting his workday. I found him sitting at a corner table, his weathered hands wrapped around a large mug, his expression troubled. "Frank," he said, looking up as I approached. "I was hoping I'd run into you." "Warren, how are things?" "Well, that's what I wanted to talk to you about." He gestured to the empty chair across from him. "You got a minute?" I sat down, already knowing this conversation wasn't going to be pleasant. "It's about that lake house of yours," Warren began, his voice careful but edged with frustration. "The work I did there last year, the foundation repair, the electrical panel upgrade, the dock reconstruction, I've been trying to get paid for months." My stomach dropped. "Months? Your son-in-law, Trevor, he told me the payment would come through after the sale closed. Said he was handling all the financial details and I'd get my money once everything was finalized." Warren's jaw tightened. "Well, the sale closed 2 weeks ago, and I'm still waiting." "How much are we talking about?" $12,400, plus interest if he wants to get technical about it. $12,000, a significant sum, and one that should have been disclosed to the buyers as an outstanding lien against the property. "I've left messages, sent emails, even stopped by his office," Warren continued, "but Trevor keeps giving me the runaround, says there were complications with the closing, and he's working on resolving the payment issues. Meanwhile, I've got my own bills to pay and a crew to keep working." I stared into my coffee cup, pieces of a larger picture beginning to form. Trevor's emphasis on a clean transaction with no complications suddenly made more sense. He had concealed Warren's unpaid bills from the buyers, finalized the sale without settling the debt, and kept the proceeds for himself while leaving the contractor stuck with the fallout. "Warren, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. When Trevor was coordinating the sale, did he ask you to adjust your timeline for any repairs? Or maybe delay submitting certain invoices?" Warren's expression darkened. "He asked me to hold off on billing for the final phase of work until after the closing, said it would simplify the paperwork and ensure I got paid faster." He laughed bitterly. "Faster. Right. And the buyers? Did they know about the work you'd done?" "That's the thing, Frank. Trevor specifically told me not to mention the recent repairs to anyone who came to look at the property. Said he wanted to control the narrative about the house's condition." Warren leaned forward, his voice dropping. "But some of that work I did, the foundation repair especially, that's the kind of thing buyers have a right to know about." Foundation repair, electrical work, major structural improvements that would significantly impact a property's value and condition. All hidden from the buyers, all conveniently omitted from Trevor's transparent transaction. "I'm not looking to cause trouble for your family, Frank," Warren said, "but I've got a business to run, and $12,000 is $12,000. If Trevor thinks he can just ignore this debt because the sale went through, he's got another thing coming." I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Warren's recent missed calls. "You've been trying to reach me?" "Yeah, I figured maybe you could talk some sense into him, or at least help me understand what the hell is going on." Warren's frustration was evident. "I mean, I did good work on that house, quality work, and now I'm being treated like some kind of con artist trying to shake down the family." As we talked, I began to understand the full scope of Trevor's deception. He'd not only hidden outstanding debts from the buyers, but he'd also misrepresented the property's recent repair history. The foundation work Warren had done was necessary because of structural issues that Trevor had never disclosed. The electrical upgrade was required to bring the system up to current safety codes, another detail omitted from the sale documents. "Warren, I want you to know that I had no idea Trevor was handling the contractor payments this way. If I'd known you weren't getting paid..." "I believe you, Frank. You've always been straight with me, but your son-in-law..." Warren shook his head. "That guy's got some explaining to do." We talked for another 20 minutes, and by the time we parted ways, I had a much clearer picture of how Trevor had engineered his perfect sale. Hidden debts, undisclosed repairs, outstanding liens, all swept under the rug to create the appearance of a clean, profitable transaction. That afternoon, I returned to my home office and began organizing everything I knew about the lake house sale. Warren's invoices and work orders, email exchanges between Trevor and various contractors, insurance claims related to the foundation issues, inspection reports that detailed the structural problems Warren had been hired to fix. As I worked, my phone buzzed with a text message from Warren. "Frank, I'm done playing games with Trevor. If I don't hear from him by Friday, I'm taking this to the next level. Thought you should know." I stared at the message for a long moment, then filed it with the rest of the documentation. Trevor had created this mess through his greed and dishonesty. Now he was going to have to deal with the consequences. But as I organized the evidence of my son-in-law's deception, I made a decision that would prove crucial in the days to come. I wasn't going to warn Trevor about Warren's growing anger. I wasn't going to intervene on his behalf or try to smooth things over. Trevor had made his choices. Now he could live with them. The next morning, I called my lawyer. Patricia Kellerman had handled our family's legal affairs for over a decade: wills, property transfers, business contracts. She was thorough, discreet, and had a reputation for asking the right questions before offering advice. "Frank, good to hear from you," she said when her secretary put me through. "How can I help you today?" "I need to understand something about property sales and disclosure requirements. Hypothetically speaking." "Hypothetically, I see." Patricia's tone suggested she understood there was nothing hypothetical about my question. "What's the situation? If someone sells a property and fails to disclose outstanding contractor liens, recent major repairs, or known structural issues to the buyers, what are the potential legal consequences?" There was a pause. "Are we talking about your lake house, Frank?" "We might be." "I see. Well, hypothetically speaking, failure to disclose material facts about a property's condition during a sale can constitute fraud. Outstanding liens especially, those create legal obligations that transfer with the property unless they're properly resolved at closing. And if the seller knew about these issues but deliberately concealed them, that would move us from negligence into intentional misrepresentation territory. Much more serious consequences: civil liability, potential criminal charges, forced reversal of the sale. Patricia's voice became more serious. "Frank, if you have concerns about how your property was sold, you should bring me all the relevant documentation as soon as possible." "What about the buyers? What recourse do they have if they discover they were misled?" "Significant recourse. They could sue for damages, force the seller to pay for repairs, even demand the sale be voided entirely. And if there are outstanding liens against the property, those become the new owner's problem unless the original seller resolves them." After hanging up with Patricia, I spent the rest of the morning reviewing every document related to the lake house sale. The purchase agreement Trevor had presented to me, the closing documents I'd signed, the disclosure forms that were supposed to detail any known issues with the property. What I found was troubling, but not surprising. Trevor had completed the disclosure forms himself, claiming no knowledge of structural issues, recent major repairs, or outstanding contractor debts. Every section that should have mentioned Warren's work was marked NA or none known, but I had documentation proving otherwise. Emails where Trevor had coordinated directly with Warren about the foundation repairs. Insurance claims that Trevor had helped file for water damage that necessitated the electrical work. Text messages where Trevor had specifically asked Warren to delay invoicing until after the closing. Trevor hadn't just failed to disclose material facts about the property, he'd actively concealed them while positioning himself as the knowledgeable professional handling all the details. I made copies of everything and locked the originals in my safety deposit box. Then I began organizing the evidence chronologically, creating a timeline that showed exactly when Trevor knew what and how he'd chosen to handle or mishandle each issue. The picture that emerged was damning. Trevor had known about every major problem with the lake house, had hired contractors to fix those problems, and had then hidden both the problems and the solutions from the buyers in order to maximize his sale price and commission. My phone rang around noon. Warren Kramer. "Frank, I wanted to give you a heads up. I just got off the phone with Trevor, and it didn't go well." "What happened?" "I told him I needed my money by Friday, no more excuses. He got all indignant, started talking about how the sale was final, and he didn't owe me anything because the work was done under your authorization, not his." "He said what?" "Yeah, that's what I thought you'd say. Basically, he's trying to claim that since you hired me originally, any unpaid bills are your responsibility, not his, even though he's the one who told me to hold off on invoicing and promised the payment would come through the sale proceeds." The audacity was breathtaking. Trevor had not only stolen from Warren, but was now trying to shift the blame to me. "Warren, do you have records of your conversations with Trevor? Emails, text messages, anything in writing?" "Oh, I've got plenty. Your son-in-law isn't as smart as he thinks he is. He sent me several emails about coordinating the work around the sale timeline, making sure the buyers didn't get confused by seeing active construction at the property." "Hey, can you send me copies of those emails?" Already on their way to your inbox. Frank, I like you, and I don't want to cause problems for your family, but I'm not letting Trevor hang me out to dry on this. If he doesn't pay up by Friday, I'm going to make this very public, very quickly. What does that mean, exactly? It means I'm going to contact the buyers directly and let them know about all the work I did on that house. Work they should have been told about before they signed anything, and then I'm going to file a lien against the property for my unpaid bills. A lien against the property. That would create a legal nightmare for the new owners, who would suddenly discover that their clean purchase came with significant hidden debts. They'd have grounds to sue Trevor for fraud, demand he pay Warren's bills, or even force a reversal of the entire sale. Warren, before you do anything drastic, can you give me until Monday? I want to try to resolve this without involving the buyers if possible. Frank, I respect you, but I'm done waiting. Your son-in-law has had months to handle this properly, and he's chosen to lie and stall instead. Friday is my final deadline. After Warren hung up, I sat in my office staring at the phone. Trevor had created a situation that was about to explode, and when it did, the consequences would be severe. The buyers would discover they'd been defrauded. Warren would get his money, but only after a messy legal battle, and Trevor would face potential criminal charges for intentional misrepresentation of property condition. But as I thought about it, I realized I felt no obligation to warn Trevor about what was coming. He'd made his choices deliberately, prioritizing his own profit over honesty and fairness. He'd manipulated my daughter, pressured me into selling, and then stolen from the contractors who'd helped maintain the property. Now he was going to face the consequences of those choices, and I wasn't going to lift a finger to save him. That evening, Melissa called. Dad, Trevor says Warren Kramer has been harassing him about some bills related to the lake house. Do you know anything about that? I know Warren did a lot of work on the property over the past couple of years. But those bills should have been paid already, right? I mean, Trevor handled all the closing details. That's what Trevor told me, too. There was a pause. Dad, you sound... I don't know. Is everything okay? Everything's fine, sweetheart. Just letting Trevor handle things the way he wanted to. Okay, but if there's some kind of mix-up with the contractor payments, maybe you could help sort it out? Trevor seems really stressed about it. I'm sure Trevor will figure out how to handle it. He's the professional, after all. After we hung up, I realized that Melissa had no idea what her husband had actually done. She thought this was a simple billing dispute, a misunderstanding that could be resolved with a phone call or two. She had no clue that Trevor had committed fraud, stolen from contractors, and put her family at risk of serious legal consequences. But she was going to find out soon enough. I spent the weekend organizing my documentation and preparing for whatever was about to happen. I made sure Patricia Kellerman had copies of everything relevant. I backed up all the digital evidence to multiple locations, and I prepared myself for the inevitable family crisis that would erupt when Trevor's house of lies finally collapsed. On Sunday evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Warren. Frank, Trevor just called me screaming about how I'm trying to extort your family. Kid's lost his mind. See you soon. See you soon. That sounded ominous. Monday morning, I got another text from Warren. Tried calling Trevor's office. They say he's unavailable all week. Guess he thinks if he hides long enough, I'll just go away. Wrong. By Monday afternoon, Warren had apparently reached the end of his patience. My phone rang around 3 o'clock. Frank, I'm done playing games. I'm going to handle this my way. Warren, what are you planning to do? I'm going to have a conversation with Trevor. Face to face. Tonight. I know where he lives, and I know where he has dinner with his family every week. A chill ran down my spine. Warren, don't do anything you'll regret. The only thing I regret is trusting that lying piece of garbage in the first place. But I'm going to fix that mistake real soon. The line went silent. I sat in my office, staring at the phone, knowing that Trevor's reckoning was finally at hand. Warren Kramer was a good man, but he was also a man who'd been pushed too far by someone who thought he was too clever to face consequences. And in a few hours, Trevor was going to discover just how wrong he'd been about that. Tuesday evening arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made our neighborhood feel especially peaceful. I spent the afternoon preparing dinner for what had become our weekly family gathering. Nothing fancy, just pot roast with vegetables, and Janice's famous apple pie for dessert. These dinners had been a tradition for years, a chance for multiple generations to stay connected despite busy schedules and different priorities. Tonight felt different, though. There was an electric tension in the air that I couldn't quite shake, a sense that something significant was about to happen. Janice noticed my distraction as I set the dining room table. You've been quiet all day, she observed, arranging fresh flowers in the centerpiece. Everything all right? Just thinking about things, I replied, straightening the silverware with more precision than necessary. Things related to Trevor and that contractor situation? I paused in my table setting. Janice had always been perceptive about family dynamics, and she'd clearly picked up on the undercurrents of tension surrounding the lake house sale. Warren Kramer has been trying to get paid for work he did on the property. Trevor's been avoiding the conversation. How much money are we talking about? Enough to matter, enough to cause problems if it's not resolved. Janice studied my face carefully. And you're not planning to help resolve it? Trevor made it clear that he was handling all the details of the sale. I'm letting him handle this detail too. There was something in my tone that made Janice look at me more closely, but before she could ask follow-up questions, we heard car doors slamming in the driveway. Through the front window, I could see Trevor's BMW parked behind Melissa's sedan, and my son-in-law was already striding toward the front door with his usual confident swagger. But as I watched him approach, I noticed something different about his demeanor. His smile seemed forced, his movements slightly hurried. When he checked his phone, his jaw tightened visibly before he shoved it back into his pocket. The doorbell rang, and I opened it to find Trevor practically bouncing on his toes, his energy manic and overcharged. "Frank, Janice, hope you're ready for another great evening," he announced, though his voice had a brittle edge that hadn't been there the week before. Behind him, Melissa and Lila looked tired. My daughter gave me a weary smile as she helped Lila out of her jacket, and I noticed dark circles under her eyes that suggested she hadn't been sleeping well. "Everything okay?" I asked Melissa quietly as Trevor launched into an animated story about his latest real estate triumph. "Just some work stress," she replied, but her eyes darted toward Trevor with an expression I couldn't quite read. Trevor's been dealing with some complicated client situations lately. Complicated client situations. I wondered if that was how Trevor had described Warren Kramer's increasingly urgent demands for payment. As we gathered in the living room for pre-dinner drinks, I noticed Trevor's phone buzzing constantly. Each notification made him more agitated, and he kept excusing himself to check messages with growing frequency. "Popular guy tonight," Evelyn Carter observed. She'd arrived early to help with dinner preparation and had been watching Trevor's performance with the same analytical attention she brought to everything. "Business never sleeps in real estate," Trevor replied, his laugh a little too loud. "When you're as successful as I've been lately, everyone wants a piece of your time." But his success story was interrupted by another buzz from his phone. This time, when Trevor glanced at the screen, his face went pale for just a moment before he forced his smile back into place. "Actually, you know what? Let me just turn this off so we can enjoy family time without interruptions," he said, making a show of powering down his phone. But I noticed his hands were shaking slightly as he did it. During dinner, Trevor seemed determined to recapture his usual dominance of the conversation, regaling us with increasingly elaborate stories about his professional achievements. But there was a desperate quality to his performance, as if he was trying to convince himself as much as us that everything was going perfectly. "The thing about being really good at what you do," he said, cutting his pot roast with unnecessary force, "is that you develop a reputation for getting results. People trust you to handle complicated situations that other agents can't manage." "Like the lake house sale?" Evelyn asked innocently. "Exactly like the lake house sale. That was a masterclass in negotiation and client management. Clean transaction, happy buyers, maximum value for the sellers." Trevor's smile was sharp. "No loose ends, no complications, no problems for anyone involved." No problems for anyone involved. The irony was almost painful. "Trevor, honey, maybe we could talk about something else?" Melissa suggested gently. "You've been working so hard lately, maybe it would be nice to just relax." "I am relaxed," Trevor snapped, then immediately softened his tone. "Sorry, babe. You're right. I'm just excited about how well everything's going." But everything wasn't going well, and we all knew it. Trevor's forced cheerfulness couldn't hide the stress radiating from every gesture, every overenthusiastic laugh, every too bright smile. As Janice served dessert, I excused myself to check something in the kitchen. Through the window above the sink, I could see a pickup truck idling at the end of our driveway. Warren Kramer's truck, unmistakable with its ladder rack and contractor equipment visible in the bed. Warren was sitting behind the wheel, his silhouette visible in the cab, waiting. Just waiting. I returned to the dining room without mentioning what I'd seen. Trevor was in the middle of another story about his professional brilliance, his voice growing louder and more animated as he tried to fill the increasingly uncomfortable silence. "The key to success in real estate," he was saying, gesturing with his dessert fork, "is understanding that every transaction is about relationships. Trust, honesty, making sure everyone involved knows they're getting a fair deal." Trust, honesty, fair deals. The words sounded obscene coming from someone who'd built his recent success on lies and theft. Lila, who'd been unusually quiet throughout dinner, suddenly looked up from her apple pie. "Daddy, why do you keep checking your pocket? Is your phone trying to ring?" Trevor's hand froze halfway to his jacket pocket. "No, sweetheart. Daddy's just making sure it stays turned off so we can have nice family time." But even as he said it, I could see the outline of his phone lighting up through the fabric of his jacket. Someone was calling repeatedly, and Trevor was ignoring it with increasing desperation. "Must be important," I observed mildly. "Nothing's more important than family dinner," Trevor replied, but sweat was beading on his forehead despite the comfortable temperature in the room. As we finished dessert and moved into post-dinner conversation, Trevor's performance became increasingly manic. He told jokes that weren't funny, laughed at his own stories, and kept steering every topic back to his professional success and the brilliant way he'd handled the lake house sale. "The buyers were so grateful," he repeated for the third time that evening. They kept saying how refreshing it was to work with someone who was completely upfront about everything. No surprises, no hidden issues, just honest communication from start to finish. Through the window, I could still see Warren's truck at the end of the driveway, waiting. Around 8:30, Trevor's phone buzzed so insistently that even he couldn't ignore it anymore. He pulled it out with shaking hands, glanced at the screen, and his face went white. "Everything okay?" Melissa asked, noticing his expression. Fine. Just work stuff. Nothing that can't wait until tomorrow." But Trevor's voice cracked slightly on the last word. That's when we heard the truck door slam outside. Heavy footsteps on the front walkway, deliberate, purposeful, getting closer. Trevor's head snapped toward the sound, his eyes wide with something approaching panic. Who could that be? Are you expecting anyone, Frank?" "No," I said calmly, though my heart was racing. "I'm not expecting anyone." The footsteps reached our front porch, paused for a moment. Then the doorbell rang. A long, insistent chime that seemed to echo through the sudden silence of our dining room. Trevor's smile, the one he'd been wearing like armor all evening, finally cracked and fell away entirely. For the first time since I'd known him, my son-in-law looked genuinely afraid. "I'll get it," I said, rising from my chair with deliberate calm. As I walked toward the front door, I could feel everyone's eyes on my back. Melissa looked confused. Janice looked concerned. Evelyn looked curious, Lila looked worried, and Trevor looked terrified. I reached for the doorknob, knowing that everything was about to change, knowing that the reckoning Trevor had been avoiding was finally at hand, and knowing that I wasn't going to do anything to stop it. I opened the door, and Warren Kramer filled the doorframe like a storm cloud. His work clothes were dusty, his face was flushed with anger, and his hands were clenched into fists at his sides. Behind him, his pickup truck sat in our driveway with the engine still running, the headlights cutting through the evening darkness. "Evening, Frank," Warren said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "I need to have a word with your son-in-law." I stepped aside without hesitation. "Come on in, Warren." Warren strode past me into the hallway, his heavy work boots echoing on the hardwood floor. I followed him toward the dining room, where the family dinner that had been so carefully orchestrated was about to become something very different. The moment Warren appeared in the dining room doorway, Trevor shot to his feet so quickly that his chair tipped backward. "Warren, how did you... This is a private family dinner," Trevor stammered, his voice climbing toward panic. "Private family dinner," Warren repeated, his tone dripping with contempt. "That's funny, coming from someone who's been avoiding my calls for weeks." Melissa looked back and forth between the two men, confusion evident on her face. "Trevor, who is this? What's going on?" "This is Warren Kramer," I said calmly, retaking my seat at the table. "He's the contractor who did extensive work on the lake house over the past 2 years." Warren stepped further into the room, his eyes locked on Trevor. "Work that I still haven't been paid for. $12,400 worth of work that your husband here promised would be covered by the sale proceeds." "12,000?" Melissa's voice trailed off as the implications began to sink in. Trevor held up his hands in a placating gesture. "Warren, this really isn't the time or place for this discussion. We can handle this through proper channels, through my office." "Your office?" Warren's laugh was harsh and bitter. "I've been calling your office for months. Your secretary keeps telling me you're in meetings or out with clients. Funny how you're never available when it comes time to pay your bills." "Now wait just a minute," Trevor said, his voice gaining strength as he tried to regain control of the situation. "The work you did was authorized by Frank, not by me. Any payment issues should be taken up with him, not..." Warren took 3 quick steps forward, and suddenly he was standing directly in front of Trevor, close enough that my son-in-law had to crane his neck to look up at the contractor's face. "You lying piece of garbage," Warren said, his voice low and dangerous. "You think I'm stupid? You think I don't keep records? Warren pulled out his phone and began reading from the screen. Email from Trevor Dalton, dated March 15th. Warren, can you hold off on invoicing for the foundation work until after we close on the sale? Want to keep the paperwork clean for the buyers. Email from Trevor Dalton, March 22nd. Please coordinate all remaining work to be completed before the property showing next week. Buyers shouldn't see active construction. Email from Trevor Dalton, April 3rd. Payment for all outstanding work will be processed immediately after closing. Thanks for your patience with the timeline. With each email excerpt, Trevor's face grew paler. Melissa stared at her husband with growing horror. Lila pressed closer to her mother, frightened by the adult anger filling the room. You told me to delay billing, Warren continued, his voice rising. You told me to hide the work from the buyers. You told me I'd get paid after the closing, and then you took the money and disappeared? That's not... I didn't... Trevor looked around the room desperately, seeking support that wasn't coming. Frank, tell him. Tell him this is between you and him, not me. I looked at my son-in-law with complete calm. You told me you were handling all the details of the sale, Trevor. I assumed that included paying the contractors. But you hired him originally. The work was done on your property. Work that you coordinated, I replied evenly. Work that you scheduled around the sale timeline. Work that you promised to pay for. Warren stepped even closer to Trevor, and I could see my son-in-law's hands shaking. $12,400, Warren said, plus interest for every month you've made me wait. I want my money, and I want it now. I don't. The sale proceeds went to... There were other expenses. Trevor was backing away from Warren, but there was nowhere to go in our small dining room. Other expenses? Warren repeated. Like your new BMW? Like that Rolex you're wearing? Like the vacation to Europe that Melissa posted all over Facebook? Melissa gasped. Trevor, you said that trip was paid for with your sales commission. It was. I mean, it was partially... Look, this is all a misunderstanding that can be worked out through proper legal channels. Warren's patience finally snapped. He grabbed the front of Trevor's shirt with both hands and shoved him backward against the wall. Legal channels? You want to talk about legal channels? Trevor's feet left the ground for a moment before Warren slammed him back against the wall. Let me tell you about legal channels, you thieving little weasel. I can file a lien against that property you sold. I can contact the buyers and tell them about all the work I did that you hid from them. I can have you charged with fraud for misrepresenting the property's condition. You can't. That would be... Trevor's voice was barely a whisper. Warren shoved him against the wall again, harder this time. I can do whatever I want, because I've got documentation of every lie you told, every promise you broke, every law you bent to make your precious sale go through. Warren, please. Melissa started to stand, but I caught her eye and shook my head slightly. She sat back down, her face pale with shock. Warren pulled Trevor away from the wall and then slammed him back again. Foundation repair that the buyers don't know about. Electrical work that should have been disclosed. Water damage that you covered up instead of reporting. Each accusation was punctuated by another shove. You didn't just steal from me, you defrauded those buyers. I didn't steal anything. Trevor's voice cracked with desperation. The sale was legitimate. Everything was handled properly. Warren laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Properly? You call hiding $12,000 in contractor liens proper? You call lying about structural repairs proper? He shoved Trevor one more time, then stepped back slightly. Here's what's going to happen, you worthless piece of garbage. You're going to pay me every penny you owe me, with interest by Friday. Or I'm going to make your life very, very complicated. I don't have $12,000 just sitting around. Warren grabbed Trevor's wrist and twisted it, making my son-in-law cry out in pain. Then you better figure out how to get it. Sell that fancy watch. Return some of those expensive clothes. Ask Mommy and Daddy for a loan. I don't care how you do it, but you're going to pay me. And if I can't? Warren's smile was cold and predatory. Then I contact the buyers and tell them everything. I file criminal charges for fraud. I make sure every real estate agent in the county knows you're a lying thief who can't be trusted. He leaned closer to Trevor's face. And then I come back here and finish this conversation in a way you really won't like. Warren released Trevor's wrist and stepped back. My son-in-law slumped against the wall, his expensive shirt wrinkled and his face flushed with humiliation. Friday, Warren repeated. Noon, my office. $12,400 plus $500 in interest for the months you've made me wait. Don't even think about trying to dodge me again. Warren turned toward the door, then paused and looked back at Trevor. Oh, and if you're thinking about calling the police, remember that I've got enough evidence to put you in jail for fraud. You really want to go down that road? Trevor said nothing, just stood against the wall, breathing heavily. Warren nodded to me as he passed. Frank, sorry for interrupting your dinner. No problem, Warren. You had business to take care of. After Warren left, the dining room fell into complete silence, except for the sound of Trevor's labored breathing and Lila's quiet sniffling. My son-in-law slowly pushed himself away from the wall, his movements unsteady. Frank, Trevor said, his voice hoarse. Frank, you have to help me. This is all a misunderstanding. Warren's exaggerating everything, making it sound worse than it is. I looked at Trevor calmly. Is he? Did you coordinate his work around the sale timeline? Well, yes, but did you promise to pay him from the sale proceeds? Yes, but there were complications. Did you disclose his work to the buyers? Trevor's mouth opened and closed without sound. I see, I said. So Warren isn't exaggerating. He's just telling the truth. But Frank, you have to understand, I was trying to maximize the value for everyone. If the buyers had known about all the repair work, they might have lowered their offer or walked away entirely. I was protecting the family's interests. By lying to the buyers and stealing from the contractors? I didn't steal anything. The money just... There were other expenses associated with the sale, and I thought Warren could wait a little longer. Thought he could wait while you spent his money on vacations and luxury items? Trevor turned to Melissa desperately. Babe, you know I would never intentionally hurt anyone. This is just a business dispute that got blown out of proportion. Warren's a hothead who doesn't understand how real estate transactions work. Melissa stared at her husband with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of disgust, disappointment, and dawning realization. Trevor, did you steal that man's money? I didn't steal anything. I redirected some funds temporarily while I sorted out the payment priorities. You stole his money, Melissa said flatly. And you lied to the buyers about the condition of the house, I added. And you put our family at risk of criminal charges, Melissa continued, her voice growing stronger. Trevor looked around the room wildly, seeking any source of support or sympathy. His eyes landed on me, and I saw desperation there that was almost pathetic. Frank, please. You know I'm not a bad person. I made some mistakes, yes, but I was trying to do what was best for the family. Can't you help me figure this out? Can't you loan me the money to pay Warren off? I looked at my son-in-law, this man who had pressured me into selling my beloved lake house, who had lied and stolen and defrauded buyers, who had brought shame and legal jeopardy to my family, and I felt absolutely nothing but cold satisfaction. No, I said simply. No? But Frank, this affects Melissa and Lila too. If I get charged with fraud, if this becomes public, it'll hurt everyone. Surely you don't want that. You should have thought about that before you decided to steal from Warren and lie to the buyers. But I'm family. You can't just abandon family when they make mistakes. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the floor. Trevor, you made it very clear that you didn't need my input or advice when it came to selling the lake house. You handled everything yourself, made all the decisions yourself, kept all the profits yourself. I paused, letting the words sink in. Now you can handle the consequences yourself. Trevor's face crumpled. Frank, please, I'm begging you. I'll pay you back. I'll do whatever you want. Just help me get through this. The answer is no. But why? Why won't you help me? I looked at him for a long moment. This man who had manipulated my daughter, stolen from honest contractors, and treated my family's legacy as nothing more than a commodity to be exploited for his personal gain. Because you made your choice, Trevor. You chose to lie, to steal, to cheat. You chose to put your greed above honesty, your profit above family. I shrugged. Now you get to live with those choices. Trevor stared at me in shock, as if he couldn't believe that his charm and manipulation weren't working, that his family connections weren't going to save him from the consequences of his actions. You can't be serious. You're really going to let Warren destroy me over some contractor bills? I'm not letting Warren do anything. Warren is collecting money that you owe him for work he performed honestly. That's not destruction, Trevor. That's justice. And with that, I sat back down at the table and calmly finished my apple pie, while my son-in-law stood against the wall, finally understanding that his reckoning had arrived and no one was coming to save him.